Hello everybody, welcome back. This is Dr. Brian Mowll, the diabetes coach, certified diabetes educator, and IFM certified functional medicine practitioner. And I'm back here today for another video blog. Today we're going to be talking about how to read labels and how to count carbohydrates. Really important topic for anybody with blood sugar dysregulation or diabetes. Now, first, let me start by saying I am not a big fan of counting anything. I find counting, especially calories, to be annoying and cumbersome and not sustainable. I don't think it's a good idea. So counting points, counting exchanges, counting calories, or any other value having to do with food quantities, I think is a waste of time. That being said, it's important to remember that all non-fiber carbohydrates eventually turn into sugar. They break down into sugar in your body. And if you have blood sugar dysregulation or diabetes, that means you have a problem being able to metabolize and handle sugar. So too much sugar can actually be toxic to your body. It is toxic to your body. So if you have diabetes or prediabetes or blood sugar issues, it is your job to know what you're eating and to be able to read a label properly and to be able to track the carbohydrates you're consuming. So this topic is really important today. In fact, it's essential. Now, let's get into understanding a label a little bit better. The first place I look when I look on a label is at the serving size. Now, this example shows you a box of Cheerios, and what you'll see is that the serving size right up at the top here is 1 cup, which is about 28 grams. So that's how much you're sort of expected to eat. And that's not really a lot of Cheerios. Most people who eat Cheerios will eat more than 1 cup at a time. But when you read the label, everything is based on that 1 cup serving size. So now I typically recommend going down and looking at the total carbohydrates. The total carbohydrates in 1 cup of regular Cheerios is 20 grams. If you go back up to the top of the label and look at the calories, there's 100 calories per cup. That means that Cheerios are 80% carbohydrate. 80% carbohydrate, way too much. Now, if we go back down, look at the total carbohydrate, right under that, you'll see dietary fiber, and that's 3 grams, and then right under that is sugar, which is 1 gram. And then they list other carbohydrates, which is the starch, and that's 17 grams. Now, the next place I look, which I think is even more important actually, is at the ingredients list. So let's go down and look at the ingredients of Cheerios. We have whole grain oats. Well, that doesn't sound too bad unless you have diabetes or blood sugar problems, which you certainly can't handle oats. There's just too much carbohydrate. But then we have modified cornstarch, which is essentially sugar. And then the third ingredient is sugar, and then salt. And then we have wheat starch, and finally vitamin E. Now, this is a pretty simple ingredient list, believe it or not, for a processed food. But you can see that still 3 of the 6 ingredients or so are sugar or starch, which basically is sugar. So Cheerios, which are deemed to be very healthy, heart healthy, in fact there's a heart right here on the cover of the box, actually are 80% carbohydrate and half the ingredients are sugar. So not recommended. Now, if we look at a product like Honey Nut Cheerios, you'll see the label is even worse. Here, if we go through the ingredient list, we have, again, whole grain oats, but then we have brown sugar, soy protein, which is just a disaster, lentils. Did you know you're eating lentils? Sugar, corn syrup, which is more sugar, molasses, which is more sugar, rice starch, which is more sugar, caramel, which consists of sugar and caramelized sugar, salt, baking soda, and then some preservatives. And then again, more sugar, cornstarch, which is sugar, honey, which is sugar, refined syrup, which is sugar. So there is just a ton of sugar in this breakfast cereal. If you go back and look at the label, a serving size of this is 1 1/4 cups, and there's 42 grams of carbohydrate, which again is about 80% of this food. 17 of those is sugar. So these foods are just a disaster for anybody with diabetes or blood sugar issues. This next label is a kind bar. A kind bar. This is a fruit and nut kind bar. And you'll see the serving size here is 1 bar, 210 calories. And if we go down to the carbohydrates, here there's 14 grams of carbohydrates and 4 grams of fiber. So I want to describe next how to calculate something called net carbs. Fiber does not break down in the same way that sugar and starch does, and it has a negligible impact on blood sugar. So we can subtract out the grams of fiber from the total carbohydrates, and that gives you something called net carbs. And that's really what we want to be paying attention to. That's the carbs that have an effect on your blood glucose levels. So on the kind bar, you'll see there's 14 grams of carbohydrates, and 4 of those come from fiber. So that gives us 10 grams of net carbs. If we go down at the ingredients list here again, we see mixed nuts, honey, which of course is sugar, that's where the sugar's coming from. Then we see non-GMO glucose, so there's some sugar there as well. Then there's some fiber, puffed rice, flaxseed, and soy lecithin. Certainly not the most ideal food to choose, but a lot better than the Cheerios. So we talked about understanding a label, looking at the serving size, then basing the amount of carbohydrates and fiber on that serving size, subtracting the fiber grams from the total carbohydrate grams to get net carbs, and looking at the ingredients list. We really don't want sugar or honey or cornstarch or anything that turns into sugar in the top 3, 4, or 5 ingredients. That's usually a disaster when it comes to blood sugar regulation. The next thing I want to talk about is what's called the 15-gram carb list. Generally, I recommend no more than 15 to 20 grams of carbs per meal. That means 3 times a day, so that gets you about 40 to 50 grams of carbs per day. And for most people, that's going to be about 10 to 15% of your total caloric intake, which is about right. Anything more than that, I think you're risking driving your blood sugar up. So 15 grams of carbohydrates per meal, and we try to get our carbohydrates through vegetables and fruits mostly. Those are your healthiest sources of carbohydrates. Nuts have some carbohydrates, but those are considered to be more of a fat. And of course, other foods like starchy vegetables and beans have carbohydrates, but those are much higher in carbohydrates, so we really have to watch the amounts that we do of those. Most of your carbs should come from vegetables and some fruit. So we have something called the 15-gram carbohydrate list. I'll make that available in the resources for you. That's a really easy way to make sure that you're not overdoing it per meal. I like to get your carbs from one source per meal and keep it as simple as possible. So hopefully that helps you to understand how to read a label, how to count carbohydrates, what's important to count and what's not important to count. Good luck, and remember to keep climbing and to never give up. This is Dr. Brian Mowll, the diabetes coach, with another video blog. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.